These are five rock legends whose careers almost never happened, musicians who faced career-ending rejections, devastating injuries, and near-death experiences that should have silenced their music forever. Instead, they became some of the most influential artists in rock history, in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, whose near misses changed the course of popular music.
People demand that you think.
On New Year's Day 1962, four young men from Liverpool drove 10 hours through a fierce snowstorm to London. They were the Beatles, and they were about to face what would become the most famous rejection in music history. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Pete Best arrived at Decca Studios in West Hampstead for what they hoped would be their big break. Instead, they walked into a nightmare that nearly killed their dreams before they began. The audition was scheduled for 10 a.m., but A&R executive Mike Smith arrived late, nursing a New Year's party hangover and still recovering from cuts and bruises after crashing his car 3 days before Christmas. When he finally showed up, the Beatles discovered another problem. Decca refused to let them use their own amplifiers, which they'd hauled all the way from Liverpool. They had to use Decca's unfamiliar house amps instead. Despite their nerves and equipment they'd never touched before, the Beatles recorded 15 songs that day. The session stretched into the afternoon with a lunch break, which suggested the label was at least somewhat interested. But when decision time came, Dick Rowe, the A&R head who'd agreed to try out the group, was completely unimpressed. His rejection became legendary. "Guitar groups are on their way out," he famously told their manager Brian Epstein. To add insult to injury, Decca chose Brian Poole and the Tremolos instead, a band that had auditioned the same day because they were local and would require lower travel expenses. Brian Epstein tried desperately to change their minds. He even promised Decca's sales team he'd buy 3,000 copies of any Beatles single they released. Had Dick Rowe been informed of this guarantee, history could have been quite different. Instead, Epstein found himself rejected by company after company. Columbia, his master's voice, Pi, Philips, and Oriole all turned down the Beatles. Paul McCartney later admitted, "Listening to the tapes, I can understand why we failed the Decca audition. We weren't that good, though. There were some quite interesting and original things." But John Lennon disagreed. "I wouldn't have turned us down on that. I think it sounded okay. They should have seen our potential." Eventually, producer George Martin at Parlophone heard the Decca demos and decided to meet the band. The rest is history. The Beatles went on to become the best-selling music act of all time and spearheaded the British invasion that transformed popular music, while Dick Rowe became known as the man who turned down the Beatles. Perhaps scrambling after the Beatles' success, Decca went on to sign the Rolling Stones, the Moody Blues, the Zombies, and the Small Faces, proving that guitar groups were definitely not on their way out. But what if one moment of bad judgment by a hungover executive had ended the Beatles' career before it started? The world might never have experienced Beatlemania, the British invasion, or the cultural revolution that followed.
But anyway, we went in to record.
The second near miss involves Tony Iommi, the man who would create heavy metal in Birmingham, England, the birthplace of heavy metal, if he hadn't lost his fingertips first. In 1965, 17-year-old Iommi was working at a sheet metal factory in Birmingham. He'd recently given notice because he was about to go on tour in Europe with a band for the first time. On his lunch break during his final day of work, he wondered aloud if he should bother going back to finish his shift. His mother scolded him to go back and finish off the job properly. That decision nearly ended his musical dreams forever. Iommi recalled in a 2017 interview, "I'd be on a line and they'd pass stuff down to me, and I'd weld it, and then it'd go on to somewhere else. One day, the person that would be sending me the thing to weld never turned up, so they put me on this giant, huge press, a guillotine-type press. I don't know what happened. I must have pushed my hand in. Bang! It came down. It just took the ends off my fingers. I actually pulled them off." The accident severed the tips of the middle and ring fingers of his right hand, his fretboard hand, since he's left-handed. At the hospital, Iommi sat with his hand in a bag, convinced his music career was over. "I was told you'll never play again," he remembered. "It was just unbelievable. I thought, that's it, I'm finished. But eventually I thought, I'm not going to accept that. There must be a way I can play." The solution came from an unexpected source. His factory foreman played him a recording of Django Reinhardt, the famous jazz guitarist who had lost 2 fingers in a fire, but continued to play brilliantly. At first, Iommi didn't want to hear it. "My friend said, "Listen to this guy play." And I went, "No way. Listening to someone play the guitar is the very last thing I want to do right now." But he kept insisting. Inspired by Reinhardt, Iommi fashioned prosthetic fingertips from melted plastic bottles, later switching to leather thimbles. But his new fingertips created three major problems. He couldn't feel the strings through the thimbles, meaning he had to press down very hard. It became more difficult to play single-note solos, resulting in a chord-heavy style with power chords. And he couldn't bend strings very well. These limitations forced Iommi to develop a completely new sound on his Gibson SG guitar. By Black Sabbath's 1971 album Master of Reality, he had tuned down his guitar to lower the string tension and ease the pain on his fingertips. Bassist Geezer Butler followed suit to match Iommi's tuning. Black Sabbath was among the first bands to utilize lower tunings, and this technique became a mainstay of heavy metal music and influenced the new wave of British heavy metal movement. He later reflected, "Of course, losing my fingertips was devastating, but in hindsight, it created something. It made me invent a new sound and a different style of playing and a different sort of music. Really, it turned out to be a good thing off a bad thing. That good thing was heavy metal, an entire genre of music born from a workplace accident that should have ended a career."
Band, they didn't know what.
The third legend who almost never existed is Rick Allen of Def Leppard, whose story proves that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the greatest triumphs. On New Year's Eve 1984, just 8 weeks after turning 21, Allen was at the peak of his career. Def Leppard had sold 6 million copies of their album Pyromania, making them the most successful British hard rock act to hit America since Led Zeppelin. That afternoon, Allen was driving with his girlfriend Miriam Berenson on the A57 road in the countryside west of Sheffield. A car in front deliberately slowed for him to catch up, only to speed up as he tried to pass. This went on for several miles until, in frustration, Allen accelerated to pass. He lost control of his left-hand drive Corvette C4, which hit a dry stone wall, and entered a field. The impact was devastating. Allen's left arm was entangled in the seatbelt and severed, remaining in the car, while he was flung out. The first person to arrive was a midwife who lived nearby. She had packed the arm in ice that she had ready for her New Year party. Doctors initially reattached the arm, but it was later amputated due to infection. When Allen regained consciousness in the hospital, he faced a crushing reality. "I honestly thought that was it," he said. "When I finally realized that I'd actually lost my arm when I came around in hospital, I really didn't want to be here, and I didn't want to see anybody. I felt so self-conscious." But Allen's bandmates refused to give up on him. While he underwent physical rehabilitation, falling to the floor during his first attempt at standing just 2 weeks after the accident, designers at Simmons Drum Company worked to create a custom electronic kit that he could operate with one arm and his feet. The comeback was extraordinary. On August 16, 1986, at the Monsters of Rock Festival at Castle Donington, Allen returned to the stage with Def Leppard. The crowd's response was electric. Just 20 months after losing his arm, he was not only playing again, but playing better than ever. Def Leppard's 1987 album Hysteria proved Allen's worth. The album sold over 20 million copies worldwide and spawned hit after hit, including Love Bites, which became the band's first #1 single. Allen's unique drum sound, incorporating both acoustic and electronic elements, became part of Def Leppard's signature style and helped define the sound of 1980s arena rock. "What I've experienced through losing my arm, I wouldn't change," Allen later said. "The human spirit is so strong, his story inspired millions, proving that physical limitations don't have to limit artistic expression."
Because when I went into that room...
Our fourth legend almost never happened because of one of the most brutal firing in thrash metal history. On the morning of April 11, 1983, Dave Mustaine woke up in a New York hotel room with an ugly hangover. Metallica bandmates James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Cliff Burton were standing over him with devastating news. He was out of the band. They had already hired Kirk Hammett as their new lead guitarist. The firing came without warning. Mustaine had been with Metallica since 1981, co-writing songs that would appear on their breakthrough albums, but his unpredictable behavior, drinking, and physical confrontations with band members had become too much. "I had been physically reckless," Mustaine later admitted, "and there had been a lot of pushing and shoving on my part with everybody in the band. I was very unpredictable, and I embarrassed everyone around me." When Mustaine asked what time his flight back to California was, he received another blow. He wasn't flying, he was taking a 4-day bus ride, scheduled to depart from New York's Port Authority bus terminal 1 hour after he was fired. But that humiliating bus ride became the catalyst for one of metal's greatest revenge stories. I was driven by revenge, Mustaine says. I was angry about what happened with Metallica, and all the way home, I kept thinking I'll just be faster, I'll be better, and my songs will be heavier. During that 4-day journey, Mustaine discovered the name for his new band. He found a pamphlet about nuclear weapons with a message that read, "The arsenal of Megadeth can't be rid." After considerable thought, he decided Megadeth would make a cool name for a metal band, especially if misspelled as Megadeth. Megadeth became Mustaine's vehicle for revenge, and it worked spectacularly. The band has sold over 50 million albums worldwide, with 6 platinum-certified albums and a Grammy Award for Best Metal Performance in 2017. Mustaine was even credited as a co-writer on 6 songs from Metallica's first 2 albums, ensuring his contribution to their success could never be erased. Megadeth helped define thrash metal alongside Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax in the genre's golden age. The irony is perfect. Being fired from Metallica didn't end Mustaine's career. It launched an even more aggressive and technically proficient band that pushed the boundaries of thrash metal. Revenge, it turned out, was the best motivation of all. Our final legend involves the most tragic near-miss in rock history, one that actually happened in 1977, claiming multiple lives while paradoxically ensuring the band's immortality. On October 19, 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd performed at the Greenville Memorial Auditorium in South Carolina. It would be their last concert with the original lineup. The next day, they boarded a Convair CV-240 airplane to take them to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where they were to perform at Louisiana State University. The plane never made it. Near the end of the flight, it ran out of fuel and crashed in a Mississippi swamp. The tragedy claimed the lives of lead vocalist Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, backing vocalist Cassie Gaines, assistant road manager Dean Kilpatrick, and both pilots. 20 others survived, but many were severely injured. Guitarist Gary Rossington later recalled the surreal horror. "I didn't think we'd survive. We were just trying to stay conscious, and everywhere I looked, it was destruction." He described hearing what sounded like hundreds of baseball bats hitting the plane's fuselage as it began striking trees. The sound got louder and louder until he was knocked unconscious, awakening on the ground with the plane's door on top of him. Drummer Artemis Pyle, despite breaking several ribs, managed to stumble through a creek and field to a farmhouse for help. In a bizarre twist, he was shot by a farmer who thought he was an intruder before being recognized and getting help to lead rescuers to the crash site. The crash occurred just 3 days after the release of their 5th studio album, Street Survivors. In a chilling coincidence, the album cover showed the band surrounded by flames, an image that became too painful to bear after the tragedy. Remarkably, the crash almost didn't happen to Lynyrd Skynyrd at all. Aerosmith had considered chartering that same Convair 2040 for their upcoming tour, but concerns over the flight crew led them to look elsewhere, a decision that saved one band, but doomed another. Scottish rock band Nazareth were also touring with Lynyrd Skynyrd and narrowly avoided boarding the flight themselves. Bassist Pete Agnew explained, "We'd seen their plane, which looked like Gaffa Tape Airlines. The tragedy should have ended Lynyrd Skynyrd forever." The surviving members took a blood oath never to use the name again, and the band remained silent for a decade. But in 1987, Ronnie Van Zant's younger brother Johnny reformed the band, ensuring that classics like Sweet Home Alabama and Free Bird would continue to be performed live. Their Southern rock legacy earned them a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006. Gary Rossington, who survived the crash with 2 broken arms, a broken leg, and a punctured stomach and liver, continued performing until his death in March 2023, as the last surviving original member. His dedication kept the band's legacy alive for nearly 5 decades after that fateful flight. Each of these stories reveals how close we came to losing some of rock's most influential artists. The Beatles could have remained unknown. Liverpool musicians, Tony Iommi, might never have developed the sound that created heavy metal in Birmingham. Rick Allen could have been just another drummer whose career ended in tragedy. Dave Mustaine might have faded into obscurity after his Metallica firing, and Lynyrd Skynyrd could have been forgotten after their devastating plane crash. Instead, these near misses became the crucibles that forged legends. Rejection taught the Beatles resilience and launched the British invasion. A factory accident gave birth to heavy metal and the new wave of British heavy metal. A car crash proved that determination conquers disability. A firing fueled a revenge that created thrash metal mastery. And a plane crash enshrined a Southern rock band in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame immortality. These weren't just lucky breaks or close calls. They were transformative moments that proved the power of human resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The next time you hear Hey Jude, the crushing riff of Iron Man, the thunderous drums of Pour Some Sugar on Me, the blistering speed of Peace Cells, or the soaring guitar of Freebird, remember this: you're hearing music that almost never existed, created by legends who refused to let fate have the final word. Their stories remind us that sometimes our greatest setbacks become our most powerful comebacks, and that true legends aren't just born, they're forged in the fires of adversity, emerging stronger, louder, and more determined than ever before.